Hello, my name is Deron and I will present Workplace Action Research Project 1 or SH26112, which is Journal Health Risk Assessment related to BTX exposure refer to the SQRA method at the Oil and Gas Testing Laboratory of PT and X. The author is Ryan Rachmanwan and Mila Tejamaya. So, introduction. Laboratory is a place to conduct experiments or test experiments where working in the place requires careful behavior in using equipment and materials, such as behavior aims to prevent or reduce the likelihood of work accidents in the laboratory. Some of the potential hazards that occur in the laboratory are fire, chemical poisoning, and accident due to equipment damage. In controlling these hazards, it is necessary to be supported by risk management to prevent the occurrence of work accident in a comprehensive, planned and structured manner under a well-managed system. Here are the methodology. There are 9 methodology in this research, which is research, location, and time methods. This research was conducted in the oil, gas, and testing laboratory of PTX with the time the research was conducted in March to June 2021. Secondly, samples and research object. This research is a total sampling where the sample is all analyzed of the oil and gas laboratory PTX that is in direct contact with the sources of exposure during the duration of the work. Thirdly, data collection techniques, information resources of chemical exposure hazards. Information on the dangers of exposure in the organic chemical benzene, toluene, and xanilin was obtained from the US EPA, ATS, DR, ebooks, and online literature. Fourth, collection of chemical exposure hazard information. The exposure hazard information of benzene, toluene, and xanilin organic chemical and exam was based on the characteristic of the chemical. The hazard level of chemical, the frequency and duration of use of the chemical, the route of inhalation exposure, and the toxicological information of the chemical. Fifth, inhalation and air sampling of the work environment. Personal sampling and sampling method refer to NMAM 1501. Benzene, toluene, xanilin. Individual sampling using a personal pump device with the following procedure, which is firstly, perform calibration of the personal pump before use. Second, install a personal pump on the body of the worker with the curl position in the breathing zone position. Third, on the pump by sitting on the floor rate between 0.2 liters minute and keep the flow rate stable. Fourth, give the identity to the body of the coral tube and then open it and connect it with the tool of occurrence with the inlet mark written on the body of the coral tube. Fifth, sampling time is adjusted to NMAM 151. Close the coral tube that has been used. Perform individual sampling for 8 hours of work. 6. Data collection on health compliance of oil laboratory workers. Data collection related to workers' health compliance of laboratory neurotoxic system use a questionnaire referred to German questionnaire development by Erling et al. 2001. The questionnaire was translated into Indonesian and given to the workers in the digital form Google Form. 7. Processing of exposure data through inhalation of hazard rating, determining the level of health hazard of each of the organic solvent chemicals studied, and then data processing danger level inhalation to obtain the danger level value. 8. Exposure risk exposure rating, performing the calculation of the TWA value of each of the exposure measurement result of organic solvent chemicals studied. The value based on the calculation is compared with the inhalation exposure value based on the exposure measurement to obtain the value of the exposure level. And lastly, risk rating. The value of hazard level and exposure level of each organic solvent chemical is compared with the value of the risk level determination to obtain the risk level value and inhalation risk level to obtain the exposure risk level. So here are the outcome and result. These are the result of the risk assessment using quantitative risk assessment method. Here is a hazard level categories using hazard category information obtained from www.icha.europe.eu. The danger levels are listed as follows. Level table 1. This is the exposure factor and exposure index, where there are several factors that affect the level exposure quantitatively. Table 2. These are exposure level of benzene, toluene, xylene based on the SQRA method. And based on the above data, to obtain the value of exposure risk level in a semi-quantitative manner by using the SQRA method, which is the root result of the multiplying the value of the hazard level HR and the value of the exposure level ER. Table 3. Table 3 risk level of benzene, toluene and xylene based on the SQA method. So the neurotoxin system due to exposure to benzene, toluene and xylene, based on the result of the study using the German version of the questionnaire 18 to determine the effect exposure to benzene, toluene and xylene PTX oil and gas testing laboratory worker on neurotoxin system, where each of the 25% of respondents gave the answer yes and 75% of respondents gave it the answer no on the question of whether you often have to take notes about things you should not forget, whether you have a difficulty concentrating, whether you often feel excessively tired, and whether you often feel unwell. At the table 4. Here are the question of the table 4. So based on that answer is related to other questions, where 50% of respondents who gave the answer yes and 50% of respondents gave the answer no to questions of whether you feel the heart beating without any pressure or doing anything, as well as the result of the study. 100% of the respondents gave the answer yes to the question of whether you are not accustomed to alcoholic beverages. So the discussion of this is risk level of benzene, toluene and xylene based on the Singapore SQRA method. Benzene is a toxic chemical and known as carcinogen, mutagen, and teratogen with grouping of category A1 in A, C, G, I, H, and group 1 in I, A, R, C, where carcinogen to humans, so the value of the danger level is 5. Toluene and xylene including in the grouping of category A3 in ACGIH is carcinogen in animals and group 2B in IARC is possible carcinogen in humans. Both chemicals are dangerous for respiration, so the value of the level of the danger is 3. Based on the calculation, it is obtained that the value of exposure level of benzene, toluene, and xylene respectively is 1.6, 20, 2.0, and 2.1. To obtain the level of the risk, a calculation is made where the value of the risk level is the root result of multiplying the value of the hazard level and the value of the exposure level. Determination of the risk level or risk rating is used to conclude the result of the chemical risk that has been done. Risk level assessment is done based on the result of the exposure level or exposure rating and hazard rating that has been done. The level of the risk will be equivalent based on significant and insignificant. The risks evaluated are insignificant if the work exposure cannot cause health problems in the workforce. Here are the discussion about neurotoxic symptom due to exposure of benzene, toluene, and xylene to PTX oil testing laboratory workers. The result of the exposure concentration shows a value below the required threshold value. This can be happen because the hazard control program conducted at the PTX oil and gas testing laboratory has run well. To reduce exposure to benzene, toluene, and xylene through inhalation, in addition to using APD, technical and administrative controls have been implemented. Good ventilation system allowed the risk of inhalation of organic solvent vapors to be minimized, as well as training on how to safe work and followed by appropriate SOPs can help employees under the danger and risk of the such exposure in the workplace. The concentration of the exposure obtained, the things that need to be considered is the frequency and duration of exposure, where the amount of exposure is small by exposes the workers for a long time and continuously, those allowing the accumulation of chemicals in the body. There is a possibility that in the early stage of the occurrence of these neurotoxin symptoms, workers have not able to explain or describe well the symptoms that appeared as a result of exposure to benzene, toluene, and xylene that are often used. So that the result of compliance of neurotoxic symptoms obtained through the questionnaire are expected to complement in the subsequent diagnostic process. So the conclusion is the exposure level value of for benzene, toluene, and xylene respectively were 1.6, 2.0, and 2.1. The RR value of benzene is 3, moderate risk, while the RR value of the toluene and xylene is 2, low risk. Overall, the number of respondents who have positive neurotoxic symptoms or answered yes to the 5 questions or more on the questionnaires as much as positive neurotoxin system questionnaires as much as 25%, 1 respondent, and 75%, 3 respondent, have negative neurotoxic symptoms. The concentration of exposure obtained as a picture when this study was taken for the determination of long-term risk. Further research is needed to be obtained more comprehensive data who have been involved in research writing. Thank you for the colleague of PTX who have been the site of the research and willing to participate in helping this research. Thank you. That's all from me. Okay.